Hey, Kaylee.
Hello, how's it going, Chris?
Good, good. A little hot out there today.
Yes, it is indeed. Finally, we got some warm spring weather.
I
Summer.
got, I got the AC unit in the window today. It turned on. It was needed for that. But I'm excited about our show today. You've put together two really great people from the Oyster Recovery Partnership. I'm going to bow out and let you introduce everybody, and I will be fielding questions from the audience. So if you have any, please just put them in the comments section. And until then, I'll see you guys later. Have fun.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have two very special guests. So we will be talking with Karis King and Tommy Price from the Oyster Recovery Partnership. So why don't we get them in here? Hi, guys.
Hey.
Hey there.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us. So before we get started, Karis, why don't we start with you? Could you tell us how long you've been with ORP?
Yeah, I've been here for about 4 years now, and I handle the PR event side of things.
Awesome. And Tommy?
Yep, I've been with ORP for 9 years and handle the Shell Recycling Alliance operations and the management of that.
Awesome. Well, to kind of get started, could you guys kind of tell me about how the Oyster Recovery Partnership was established and just kind of how that all came about?
Yeah, so ORP, or the Oyster Recovery Partnership, was established. It's been a little over 2 decades now. We actually just celebrated our 25th anniversary, and in that time, we've accomplished a lot. We've become the leading nonprofit to help manage and carry out Maryland's oyster restoration efforts. The reason oysters are so important, as many of you know, is because they are incredible filter feeders, and they also serve as really important habitat for underwater life. So mussels, crabs, fish, tunicates, you name it, in addition to being delicious. So over time, we experienced kind of a decimated oyster population. So oysters are at like 1 to 2% of historic levels that we saw in the 17th century. So this was from poor water quality, as well as over harvesting from mechanical dredging, and when canning became popular, canning foods, as well as 2 diseases, MSX and dermo, which really took a toll on the oyster population. So we were kind of tasked back in 1992, after a roundtable of about 40 people came together and said, what can we do? How can we handle the collapse of the oyster population? So they brought about decided a long-term, large-scale approach was necessary, and to ORP. So we've been around since 1992, and we're a very balanced organization with many different user groups. So we have scientists, watermen, seafood, restaurants, all represented, environmentalists, and throughout that time, we really hold true to that. All of those people are still represented, and different perspectives come together. The decisions that are made really determine how we carry on in best approaches. So that's the abbreviated version of how it all came to be. But it's really exciting because we do have so many different groups represented.
Yeah. And I know you do our ORP does many different things to help the oyster population. But what is your overall mission, and how do you kind of go about that?
Yeah, so our single most important goal is to get more oysters into the water, whether that be through restoration work, or assisting oyster farmers with their operations, or helping watermen replenish public harvest areas. It's not done alone by any means. We have an amazing group of partners. The University of Maryland Horn Point Oyster Hatchery, which is where the larva is created, over on Maryland's Eastern Shore in Cambridge. Army Corps of Engineers, the Department of Natural Resources. It's true collaborative effort. I'm sure I left someone out, but that's really what our mission is, to get more oysters, basically put ourselves out of business, if you will. We're looking to see those oysters at levels they were hundreds of years ago, where you hear oysters described as the size of dinner plates, or when ships had to navigate around those oyster reefs, as Chris mentioned, they were so tall and abundant that they were actually navigational hazards. So it's really important. Our goal is to get more oysters in the bay because these are filtering powerhouses. One oyster can filter 30, 40, even 50 gallons of water per day. So you can imagine the exponential impact when we're talking millions of oysters over thousands of acres. And if you're an angler, I'm sure there's some anglers out there, fish love oyster reefs. So they're a huge benefit to the fishery and the ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, oysters as large as dinner plates. And I think Tommy actually has to show us.
Yeah, so we've recycled some that are pretty close to dinner plate size. So here's up to my head. This is one of our larger specimens.
And where did that come from?
I don't know, actually.
Oh,
I think this was maybe one that was through a research facility, and it was recycled after its kind of commitment to science and sacrifice for science, most likely. So this one was too good to go into the pile. This is, if not the biggest, if not second biggest one that we've come across.
Yeah, wow. So while we have you here, Tommy, could you tell us a little bit about your work with the shell recycling program?
Sure. Yep. So it began before I came with ORP. We are celebrating our 10th year of it this year. So it started in 2010, officially with 26 restaurants, and they came on board that winter. But it actually came from the discussion with some local oyster shuckers and ORP and some restaurants. Fall of 2009 is when the talks were going, and some shuckers were going to a lot of events. They were trying to save the shell for themselves. Some people want them as driveway fill, but some people knew the value of them. And they contacted ORP and said, hey, we've got all these shells. We're at all these events. What can we do with them? So I think the big kickoff in that fall was Old Ebbitt's Oyster Riot. And from there, it actually became like an organized structured pickup where we have weekly pickups. And then, that next year, 26 restaurants in the pilot program got 3,800 bushels that year and grew from there.
Wow. So then for people who aren't familiar, what exactly do we do with the recycled shell?
So we pick it up, and the first thing is we have to age it. So oyster shell, as you can imagine, being outside, it's an extremely perishable food. So it needs at least a year just to dry out, age. And that's not only to let the tissues decompose, it's also to prevent introduction of some of the oyster diseases that might be in the oysters. Most notably dermo. MSX is the other one, but I think dermo was the one where they determined 3 to 6 months usually eliminates most of the dermo, but I think the state of Maryland asked for 1 year to dry out all the shell. And after that, it's aged, or after it's aged, it's actually washed at our facility. It's a big series, power washers, tumblers, and that goes into the hatchery system. And then with that, we can actually produce up to 10 baby spat on shell oysters per recycled half shell.
Wow, it's really impressive.
Yeah, definitely.
So once the shells are prepared, you mentioned the Oyster Hatchery. So could you tell kind of us about that process when the spat is placed on the shell?
Sure. Karis and I discussed this earlier. We don't have science backgrounds, but we've been around the hatchery enough to get a basic understanding. Larval oysters are bred from basically the stud oysters, the adult oysters that they have. So they spawn them, just affecting the algae content that those oysters eat, temperature, and oysters external fertilization. So sperm and egg meet in the water at the hatchery. They form a larvae, and those actually swim around and look for something, a substrate to set to. And oyster shell is the best natural substrate. So those oyster shells are put in cages. I think we have a photo. Eventually, you might see the cages then are actually placed in big tanks of water. And those tanks of water at University of Maryland's Horn Point Oyster Hatchery. Yep, there they are. So there's a setting pier like that. The cages go into those tanks, and then the oyster larvae is introduced to those tanks with the Choptank river water. And they set to the shells, give it some time to grow out, and then placed on the planting vessel and taken out to the designated oyster reefs where they're planted. Yep, there it is.
Awesome.
So that can hold, I think it averages more than 1,500 bushels of planting. And they'll do those all summer, and they'll plant hundreds of millions of oysters, and over 100,000 bushels of oyster shell easily every summer.
Yeah,
Yep.
very impressive. So then, Chris, if you could bring us all back, I have a question for Karis. So now that we've talked about, once the this oyster spat gets out on the boat, could you tell us about the Choptank River complex and the restoration efforts that are going on there?
Yeah, definitely. So the Choptank River complex is located on Maryland's eastern shore, and it consists of 3 different sites. So it's the Little Choptank River, the Tread Avon River, and Harris Creek. These sites were specifically chosen through the federal 2014 Chesapeake Bay watershed agreement, and that tasked Virginia and Maryland to each restore 5 tributaries, so 10 total. Harris Creek was the first to undergo work in 2011, and that wrapped up in 2015. And throughout that time, 2 billion oysters were planted over 350 acres. So it's huge. For comparison, it's the size of the U.S. National Mall about. So It's really big. Yeah. And we actually just got, what's really great, not long ago, we finally got the monitoring results back from that, because it takes some time for the oysters to grow and have a really good understanding of, is this working? Is this reef something that we've invested in this time and energy? Is this something that is coming full circle and we're seeing growth and seeing a success? And the good news is it definitely has. I mean, we couldn't be more excited. Harris Creek is seeing cleaner, clearer waters. Fish are coming to the area more than ever before. And the study has shown that it actually cleans itself within 10 days now in the summer months. So it's pretty cool.
Wow. Yeah, that is really impressive. Are there plans in the works to seed other areas in the Choptank or other areas around the Chesapeake?
Yeah, so we still have the 2 left, the Little Choptank River and the Tread Avon. So we're finishing up work on those. And then there were 2 more that were recently chosen, 2 more areas, the Minokan River in Somerset County, as well as the St. Mary's River in St. Mary's County. So those are the next on the list, and we're really looking forward to that.
Great. So I know sometimes we get questions about how the public can get involved. And specifically, I know you guys have a program called the Marylanders Grow Oyster Program. If you could tell us about that.
Tommy?
In here. Okay, there I am. Yeah, so
Tommy actually manages the program too, so.
Okay.
Yep, so that's been ongoing for quite a while. That's older than the shell recycling program. But that, I think, this year will be its 13th year. Sadly, last year we could not operate the program because of the salinity. Actually, the year before, it had rained just an incredible amount. So we're resuming this year, knock on wood. We have good weather for it. But yeah, it's a kind of a grassroots oyster growing program for waterfront property owners and community groups to get involved and really kind of hands-on grow oysters off their docks. So what it is, it's cages that are delivered to these waterfront property owners, and along with the cages come these bags of oyster spat. Each bag is roughly a half a bushel, and one bag can fill 3 of these cages. So last year, I think it was, or 2 years ago, 2018, close to 3,000 bags. So it's a pretty substantial amount of shell, like 1,500 bushels coming out. And I think that's upwards of 5 to 7 million spat on shell going back in the bay through that program. It's over 30 tributaries. And most of that shell will come from the Horn Point, which is University of Maryland's Center for Environmental Studies or Sciences. And some of it will actually come, if you're in the lower western shore, from Piney Point, which is a DNR facility. But yeah, it's I think it's done. It's tens of millions of spat on shell back in the bay in the 12-year history so far.
Yeah, that's very impressive. And you mentioned salinity. So is there a certain point kind of on the bay where you have to be below a certain point to really get that salinity? Or do you have growers more in the upper Chesapeake?
It's a mix. There is a cutoff, unfortunately, but it's sometimes seasonal, but generally above the Patapsco River. The south side of Patapsco River, we do have some participants, Rock Creek, Bodkin Creek. But once you get into the north side, it's generally a little too fresh. And we did have a couple years where we tried it with very less than successful outcome. But the majority of it, I would say, are the western shore tributaries, Magathie, Severn, Southwest Road River, as well as a lot on the Patuxent, Chester, Eastern Bay, Choptank. Mostly a middle bay distribution area.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how would someone sign up to do this, a property owner?
Yeah, so it's on our website. It is kind of a volunteer-based program, so it uses community groups to arrange the delivery point, the delivery date as well. That usually occurs. The deliveries themselves come in August through October, usually, depending on where you are. And the plantings will occur the following spring. So you'll hold on to those spat-on shell in the cages off your dock from end of summer through winter, and then right about late spring is when we ask the community groups to plant them. So a lot of these groups will have boat owners, or they'll have connections to a waterman, and they will go out on these designated MGO oyster reefs and actually plant their kind of fostered oysters.
Cool. And, does the person need to know a lot about oysters, or is it kind of, you guys tell them what they need to know, and then when they're ready, you pick them back up? Yeah,
it's pretty hands-off. Oysters are pretty simple. They're hardy. These are in cages. They're protected from majority of predators, although some small juvenile crabs and fish will get in there. And I neglected to mention, on our website is the MGO sign-up page. So Marylanders Grow Oysters at Oyster Recovery on our page. It does have the sign-up link.
Great.
Yep.
And so what about shell recycling? I know you have partners with restaurants, but could individual recycle their own shells, or how does that work?
Absolutely. We have, I believe, 76 public drop sites around the state of Maryland, and actually even some in DC and Northern Virginia. So if you have shell, you're more than welcome to, on our website is a list, it's a map of all the public drop sites. And yeah, leave them there. We come by. We have a truck actually that resumed today collecting from those public drop sites.
Great. Yeah. Let's see. So, Karis, apart from these programs, how else could the public get involved to support your mission?
Great question. So we always encourage everyone, eat local seafood, support your local oyster farmers, support your local restaurants. As Tommy mentioned, one recycled shell can support the planting of up to 10 baby oysters. So keeping that shell local, supporting especially during this time with restaurants operating at limited capacity and oyster farmers looking to sell their product direct. You can go right on our website and check out a list of farmers who have that option. I'll put the link below. And then additionally, making sure that you're recycling your shell and you're giving high fives to the restaurants that are recycling your shell. And of course, if you feel so inclined, donating to the cause. 95% of all of the donations we receive go directly into oyster restoration work. So for every dollar raised, we can plant approximately 100 baby oysters back into the water. So that volunteering, Marylanders Grow Oysters program, there's definitely.
Yeah, a lot of great ways, it sounds like. And I know you guys usually have, or you have certain events throughout the year. I understand, this year some things might be canceled. But what kind of public outreach events do you guys host?
Yes, it's been a bummer so far. This is kind of when things start gearing up. We have oyster festivals. We have all sorts of fun events. We have a lot of fun. So it could be anything from beer festivals, oyster festivals. We have our annual fundraiser, which typically happens. Some of this or if not a lot, will be on hold this year. But we are doing a lot of fun stuff over Zoom. So we've recently done a sip and shuck, which is where we have one of our in-house shuckers show his skills, and then we do a cheers with some of our beverage partners. Flying Dog was on the last one. We're trying to get inventive and come up with still ways that we can engage and support all of our partners in the local seafood industry. So just stay tuned. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Oyster Recovery.
Awesome. And I know we've kind of touched on this, but what are some like long-term restoration goals of ORP? I know you said you kind of want to put yourselves out of business, which would be a great, like you said, great goal. But yeah, kind of looking into the future, what do you hope to accomplish?
Yeah, so we want to continue to educate the public on the importance of keeping that shell. Shell is a big reason, a big critical resource that we need to build these oyster reefs. So Tommy does a great job of just spreading that message and keeping restaurants engaged and excited. So we want to continue to hit that program full force. And we've even started, in addition to these large scale sanctuaries that I was telling you about, these protected oyster areas, involving community groups in how they can create their own smaller sanctuary within smaller rivers. So for example, we just did one in the Severn River. We actually helped enhance and rebuild a historic oyster bar. So that's there, that's protected. And we're actually gearing up to do that again, raise community supported funding to plant more oysters. So the goal is to think outside of the box instead of all of these larger sanctuaries. Start thinking about smaller community rivers that we can enhance through plantings. So we'd love to hear from you guys if anyone has any interest in maybe rallying together and coming up with a way that we would help you come up with a way that you can support your own river. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah, that's great. So let's see, we have had a couple questions come in, and I know you guys mentioned, you're not scientists, but you're very familiar, with the work that ORP is doing. But if any of these questions that have come in over Facebook, could we get back to you guys after the fact if you need to converse with someone about some of the more technical questions?
Sure. Tommy, I don't know if you're seeing these. We can definitely answer some of them. I think the first one, do oyster farmers use different spat so that we have different oysters? And the answer is yes. Oysters that are the spat provided to farmers are triploid oysters. So they do not spawn. So they put all their energy into growing as opposed to reproducing. And they are similar to like a seedless watermelon. I can't get too much into the science of it, but they grow very quickly and they're just as delicious and they're plump and great. So Tommy, if you have anything to add to that.
It's in my limited biology, I do remember that it's a triploid oyster, meaning it has the 3 sex chromosomes, and it's a hybrid between a tetraploid with 4 sex chromosomes and a diploid, which is 2, together to make a 3. That's the extremely simplified version, and I'm sure Horn Point is shaking their head, but that's on a half shell how you get the triploid.
Sounded good to me.
Yeah.
Tommy, do you know anything about an oyster growth safety zone on the Chester River? I'm not familiar.
Yeah. So that I think is the harvest reserve zones. That's kind of an open as needed public bottom. So they're planted, they're let to grow out and then opened kind of as needed on a either rotational or just if the harvest has been poor one year, that's kind of a safety area. I'm looking at some others. Someone mentioned Vibrio, and they said the Volnificus that's pretty nasty. But MDE, the Department of Environment, actually does water quality testing. One of our former employees actually works with the oyster testing in there. So it's pretty interesting. They do regular testing to make sure these waters are safe, and that's one of the reasons when you get oysters, the restaurant that orders those oysters has to have a harvest tag. If there happens to be some kind of, pathogen or bacteria or anything like that, it can be traced, and traceability in seafood is very important. And this is one reason, because they keep it safe, they monitor it, and they keep tabs on things like that. And there's two different. Vibrio is pretty tricky. It thrives in warm water, but it can be from, there's kind of the kind you get sick from eating oyster, and also from like an open wound per se. And both can be pretty serious, but I think the open wound one is definitely a hazard to people that work the water, especially in the warmer weather.
Yeah, and we had a question about warm water plantings. What time of year do you guys do the plantings? Is it strictly in the summer? Is there any cooler water planting that is being done?
It varies every year. I think they have started as early as March, but typically they start in April. And I think upper 60s is when oysters naturally reproduce best. And so late spring is typically when you'll see the first natural ones. And that's really, we start in spring and we go all the way till September. So that's another question we'd have to get a good answer from Horn Point. But every year, I guess end of June, July, there is kind of a lull in the oyster spawning. And that seems to happen every year. I don't have a good answer for that. We'll have to check with our friends at Horn Point.
And do you guys know how many plantings have you done so far this year?
I don't recall. Karis, I know we've done a few.
Yeah, so we've planted a few public harvest areas. So those are areas where the watermen can come and kind of a put and take, if you will, but with oysters. And then as far as any restoration work, we're working through that now. So planting should be gearing up here soon.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, I think that was most of the questions. We did have someone say that they might be interested in getting their community involved. So that's exciting.
Awesome.
On the Chester River.
Great.
Was there anything else you guys wanted to add that, maybe we didn't touch on, just about the work that you're doing or how people can, get involved? And I know we covered a lot of it, but if there's anything else you would like to add.
Yes, I'd say, sorry, Tommy. I'd say, we really are active and always trying to come up with new, exciting, whether it be restaurant campaigns or like the Build a Reef in the community. We have a great marketing team. So if you keep up with us on our e-newsletter as well as social media, there's a lot of great content that comes out, and we'd love to keep you posted on our restoration updates and some of the fun things we do, all of those events that hopefully will come back around here in the future. So just highly recommend that, definitely.
Mm-hmm. I was going to add, shell recycling is dependent on restaurants and aquaculture and harvest of oysters. So eating oysters, that's the way we get shells to go back in the bay. So especially now, restaurants definitely need some help, and eating oysters is a great way to support restaurants, the oyster farmers, and the oyster restoration going back in. And that, make sure you find restaurants that are recycling as well. And we have a great list of almost 300 restaurants and just members on our website that you can check out and see if your local neighborhood place is recycling their shell. And if they're not, maybe suggest it to them, and you can reach out to us and we'll try and get in touch with them and get them on the right path.
Awesome.
Yeah. If you see this sign, here we go. They are recycling through us. And yeah, we always just recommend, if you can just show your support, say thank you for what you do, because a lot of these restaurants do take an extra step. They go out of their way. As you can imagine, a restaurant can get extremely busy and be a little chaotic. And there are a lot of balls to juggle. And the fact that they really do care about the environment, are taking those steps to save that shell, train their staff, and just keep on top of that. We really appreciate that. So give them a thumbs up for us.
And what is your website, just for people who aren't familiar?
It's oysterrecovery.org.
Awesome. And is that where people can make contributions?
Yes. Yes, okay. There should be, I believe, a donate button. on the header. Yeah.
If you make a donation, do you get a cool ORP sticker for your car?
You do.
Ah,
You do.
everybody wants. I just want that on their car. That's what I found out. Well, very cool. So thanks very much to you guys, obviously. But I did just do our quick drawing, and Melissa Holland, you are the proud recipient of the Polly Shine. So that's what Melissa's doing this weekend. Congratulations, Melissa. I knew that wasn't exactly what you had in mind, but we'll get your name and info here very shortly. And if we don't have any other questions, I'm going to sign us out of here. I'm just looking over here.
And we can add to the comments the link to their website for anyone who is asking.
Yeah, we'll add that in there. And if you have any questions, post this. You can actually ask those, and we try and go back in and just after the program's ended for the recording, go in and answer those questions as best as we can. Melissa gave us a woo boo, which I think means she's excited. And John, thanks very much for your input, and we'll get your information to these guys so you can get your community involved in the Oyster Restoration Partnership. Thanks, Karis. Thanks, Tommy. And thanks, Kaylee. This was great. I hope people understand that this is a huge endeavor. It takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of cooperation between a lot of different people. And we certainly at PropTalk appreciate the work that you guys are doing. So thanks very much, and we appreciate your time. Until then, can you, everyone who's watching, do us a favor? The best thing that you can do for us is say, hey, PropTalk's got it going on. You got to check out PropTalk Live on Wednesdays at 5 o'clock. Tell people about it, share it on Facebook, like our page, all that stuff. And by all means, check out the magazine when you have a chance, or go onto our website and look at the digital copy. And the best thing that you could do is say to an advertiser, hey, I read PropTalk. Why aren't you advertising there? So with that being said, thanks again for joining us, and y'all have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Don't miss another PropTalk video. Subscribe to our channel today.